My name is Amy Mitchell. I'm 32 years old. And this is the story of how my parents abandoned my daughter in foster care, flew to Hawaii with my sister's kids, and how I made sure justice came faster than they could return home. It started with a phone call. Not one of those frantic, middle-of-the-night emergency calls that jolt you out of sleep with dread. No, this was worse. It was the kind of call that slices through your routine, rearranging your entire life in a breath. I was midway through a shift at St. Augustine Hospital, Oregon's largest trauma center. The ER was chaos, highway pileup victims being rolled in, nurses sprinting between gurneys, blood and adrenaline everywhere. I had just stabilized a young man with internal bleeding when my cell buzzed. Evergreen Elementary School calling. The second I saw the caller ID, something twisted in my gut. I picked up with my gloves still on. Hello? Mrs. Mitchell? This is Albright from Evergreen's front office. Just calling to check in. Ellie didn't show up for class today. We haven't received an absence notice. My heart didn't sink. It plummeted. Ellie was staying with my parents. They were supposed to drop her off. Are you sure? She wasn't marked present, and we haven't seen her all day. I dropped the phone. Somewhere behind me, someone was shouting for help. A doctor cursed. But I wasn't there anymore. I ripped off my gloves, tossed the bloody gown aside, and ran. I didn't clock out. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. My legs carried me on autopilot toward the parking garage. 15 minutes later, I was outside my parents' house, a tidy gray brick colonial with lavender lining the porch. But something was wrong. No car in the driveway. The curtains pulled. Lights off. I pounded on the door. No answer. Ellie. I screamed. Nothing. I used my spare key. Inside was silent. Not a single sound. Not even the faint pitter-patter of child's feet on the hardwood floors. The house smelled of stale toast and lavender airspray. And on the kitchen counter sat a single piece of paper. Neatly folded. My mother's handwriting. Amy. We're sorry. We can't keep watching Ellie. We arranged temporary guardianship. You can contact Child Protective Services for details. Mom and Dad. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. I would have collapsed if the counter hadn't been there. They didn't lose her. They didn't have an emergency. They gave my daughter away. Without calling me. Without even telling me where she was. I called CPS. After being transferred 3 times, a woman named Lana calmly told me, yes. Ellie Mitchell was surrendered into emergency foster care. Guardians stated they could not contact the mother and believed she had abandoned the child. What? I am her mother. I was working a 12-hour trauma shift. Ma'am, I understand your distress. We'll need documentation of custody for reunification. I drove to CPS with every document I owned, birth certificate, divorce decree, medical forms, custody rulings. Everything. And still, I waited for hours in that freezing fluorescent lobby while my daughter, my baby, sat somewhere with strangers, probably wondering why mommy never came back. By the time I was allowed in, Lana sat me in a narrow office with thin walls and said gently, Ellie is currently with Martha and Peter Kimball, licensed emergency guardians in Marion County. We'll arrange for you to reunite with her today, once verification is complete. I barely registered her voice. I was already out the door. The Kimballs lived in a white 1-story ranch outside the city. When Martha opened the door, she smiled kindly. You must be Ellie's mom. Come in, she's in the backyard. I didn't hear the rest. I ran. And there, under a maple tree, Ellie sat cross-legged in the grass, clutching her worn-out teddy bear, Clementine. Her curls were messier than usual. Her eyes, oh God, her eyes, were swollen, red, and hollow. When she saw me, she didn't smile. She ran. And I caught her in my arms like I'd been underwater for days, and she was air. "I thought you weren't coming back," she whispered. "No, baby. No. I would never leave you." I held her like my life depended on it. Later that night, while she slept, I opened Instagram just to feel something familiar. And what I saw shattered what was left of my restraint. There they were. My parents. On a beach in Hawaii. Bright shirts. Cocktails. Sand. Smiling like they hadn't just handed my child off to strangers and flown halfway across the world. Next to them? My sister Rachel. Her 2 kids, Caleb and Sophie, building sandcastles. The caption? "Surprise family trip to Maui. So grateful for time with the best grandkids in the world." My hands shook as I saved every post. Every photo. Every smiling lie. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat beside Ellie's bed, holding her small hand, watching her chest rise and fall. And by sunrise, I knew what I had to do. They'd think I'd let it go. They'd think I'd stay silent, just like I always had, the exhausted nurse, the single mom, the inconvenient daughter. But this time, they messed with the one thing I would tear the world apart for. This time, they left their lies in writing. And justice was coming. That morning, I brewed coffee in the Kimball's kitchen, hands still shaking. Ellie was curled on the couch with Clementine, barely speaking. Her eyes never left the door. Every creak in the hallway made her flinch like someone might come take her again. I didn't know how to fix that. But I knew how to fight. With my laptop open and the morning sun barely lighting the screen, I started collecting everything. Screenshots of Instagram posts. Copies of my custody documents. The intake form Lana had provided. Notes from the school call. I created a folder labeled Ellie, Evidence. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "What's going on? Why are people saying you called CPS on mom and dad?" I didn't answer. 2 minutes later, another buzz. "Seriously, Amy, you need to calm down. You're blowing this way out of proportion." And then, a voice message. "Look, I don't know what CPS told you, but Mom said Ellie was upset, and they didn't want to call you while you were at work. It was just temporary. You're making this into a legal thing when it was just a family misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? I picked up my phone and replied with one sentence. "You left my daughter in foster care while you were sipping cocktails in Hawaii. Don't call this a misunderstanding." Then I blocked her. I contacted Lana at CPS again and asked to speak to someone in legal review. A soft-voiced woman named Tara called me back. "We've reviewed your documents and verified your sole legal custody. I've also seen the vacation posts. You're right to be concerned. There's now sufficient reason to escalate the matter." Escalate how? "We'll be filing for internal review and notifying law enforcement. What your parents did could constitute child abandonment, false reporting, and failure to disclose custodial status. Especially given their departure." I stared out the window where Ellie sat coloring Clementine's ears blue with a crayon. What happens next? You can choose to pursue charges. It's your right as Ellie's legal guardian. The word charges hung in the air like a lightning bolt waiting to strike. Part of me recoiled, they were my parents. But another part, the part that had held Ellie as she sobbed into my shirt and whispered, "Was I bad, Mommy?" That part felt fire. I texted my old friend Sophia, now working at the district attorney's office. I'd once helped her mother during a rough ER shift, and we'd stayed in touch. I didn't expect her to respond so quickly. "Sophia, meet me at the DA's office tomorrow at 9. Bring everything." That night, after Ellie fell asleep, I opened my phone again. Rachel had posted a new photo. My dad helping Caleb snorkel. Mom with a flower lay around her neck. Caption: Grandparents of the Year Ohana means everything. It was so tone-deaf, so detached from reality, I could barely process it. And yet, I was glad. It proved intent. They weren't overwhelmed. They weren't confused. They'd planned this. As if Ellie were some chore they could outsource and still brag about being good grandparents. The next morning, I wore a blazer I hadn't touched since my divorce hearing. I brought a binder thick with paperwork, screenshots, emails, and handwritten notes from Ellie's therapist, who had already spoken to her about the trauma. Sophia met me at the courthouse with a coffee and zero pleasantries. "This won't be easy," she said, flipping through the file as we sat in a side conference room. "But it's winnable. These actions aren't just emotionally devastating. They're criminal. You ready for that?" I wasn't. But now I am. She paused at one page. A comment under Rachel's beach post. "Your parents are amazing. So lucky to have them while you vacation." It had been posted the same day Ellie was dropped at CPS. Sophia glanced at me. "Let's do this." We filed formal charges. 3, to start. Child abandonment. Providing false information to a government agency. Unlawful transfer of custodial rights. I signed the statements, every letter powered by years of being the forgotten daughter. The second best. The backup plan. Then I made one more call, to Lieutenant Bryant, a Salem officer I'd worked with during a domestic abuse call 3 years ago. He remembered me. When I told him what happened, he didn't interrupt. He just said, "Send me everything. We'll open a joint investigation with Honolulu PD." 2 days later, Sergeant Naomi Fujimoto from the Honolulu Police Department called. "We located your parents at a resort in Maui," she said. They were shocked when approached. Claimed it was all a misunderstanding. "That's their favorite word," I muttered. We recorded the interaction. Mr. Mitchell insisted he was acting responsibly. Mrs. Mitchell cried and claimed the situation was being twisted. But their flights were booked 2 months in advance. This was not a last-minute emergency. I sent over the complete timeline of events, with Instagram posts proving their presence on the island while Ellie was being processed into care. By the time I closed my laptop, there was no uncertainty left. This wasn't about a miscommunication. This was betrayal. And then, the internet found out. A TikTok posted by a tourist at the Hawaiian resort went viral. The video showed my parents being approached by officers as a confused Rachel stood beside them. The caption read, "Cops show up at beach resort for grandparents who ditched granddaughter for vacation." Yikes. It got over 400,000 views in 24 hours. Comments flooded in. "This poor little girl. Imagine your own parents doing this. Hope the mom gets full justice." And then a hashtag. Hashtag justice for Ellie. The press picked it up. An Oregon news station released a headline. "Grandparents abandon child for Hawaiian getaway, daughter presses charges." People started looking deeper. Finding Rachel's public posts. The picture-perfect family with cracks now visible to the world. I stayed quiet. Not because I was hiding. But because I was waiting. 3 days after the video went viral, I got a message request on Instagram. From Rachel. "Are you happy now? The police scared Caleb. Mom can't stop crying. You ruined everything just to make a point? No apology. Just guilt trips and gaslighting." Then a voice message. "Mom is breaking down. Dad's health isn't great. This was all just a misunderstanding, Amy. Ellie's fine. Please drop the charges." I played it on speaker while Ellie built a spaceship from Legos in the living room. She didn't know the chaos happening outside our quiet, safe house. I wanted to keep it that way. I looked at my phone. And deleted the message. This wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. And I wasn't done yet. When the court date was officially announced, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. But not weak. The hearing would be held in the Marion County Courthouse, an open session to determine if my parents would face legal consequences, and what future contact, if any, they could have with Ellie. I prepared in silence. While others speculated online, while Rachel screamed into the void about family loyalty, I stayed focused on the only thing that mattered, Ellie's safety, and her sense of self-worth. The night before the hearing, Ellie crawled into my bed. She didn't say a word at first. Just wrapped her arms around my waist and tucked her head beneath my chin. "I know they didn't want me," she said softly, "but I'm glad you did." I held her close. "I always want you, baby. Always." Her voice cracked. "Even when I spilled juice on the floor? Or forget my spelling words? Even when the whole world falls apart," I whispered. "I'll still want you." She drifted off to sleep. And I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many wounds she would carry into adulthood because of people who were supposed to love her most. When we walked into the courthouse the next morning, I held Ellie's hand tight. She wore a pale blue dress with white tights. Clementine was tucked under her arm. Her eyes were steady. Across the aisle, my parents sat side by side. My mother looked ghostly, powdered pale, mascara thick, lips trembling as if trying to hold back a sob for effect. My father wore his courtroom suit, the same one he used to wear during his time as an attorney. But his hands fidgeted in his lap, twisting the edge of his tie. No Rachel. Not surprising. Judge Roberta Kingsley presided. Sharp eyes. No-nonsense presence. I'd read about her in the paper before, firm on child protection cases, a former foster care advocate herself. The bailiff called the case State vs. David and Lorraine Mitchell. Charges: child abandonment, providing false information to child services, and unlawful custodial transfer of a minor. My parents didn't speak. Their attorney did, some overly rehearsed man who smiled too often and used the word misunderstanding like a punctuation mark. They were under stress, he said. There was miscommunication. The grandmother attempted to contact Amy, but after receiving no response, they made the only choice they thought was safe. I slammed my pen down hard enough that Sophia reached over and gently touched my hand. I looked up at the judge. "Your Honor," I said, standing. "I have documented proof of a planned vacation. Photos. Timestamps. Social media posts. Booking confirmations. There was no emergency. There was no stress. They had planned to fly to Hawaii, and when I asked them to care for my daughter for 3 days, they didn't tell me they were leaving. They handed Ellie to strangers and boarded a plane without informing me." Judge Kingsley raised a hand. "The court has reviewed the documentation, Ms. Mitchell. And I've seen the video taken in Hawaii, where your parents stated they did what was necessary while lounging at a resort." She turned to my parents. "You handed off your 8-year-old granddaughter, who has a documented gluten allergy, who had no medical records provided, no proper explanation given to the child herself, to a stranger at CPS, left a note in your daughter's kitchen, and flew to another state with your other grandchildren. You told no one. That's not a miscommunication. That's willful neglect." My mother finally broke her silence. "We just thought," her voice cracked. "We thought she needed a break." Amy was always overwhelmed. She looked tired all the time. And Ellie. Ellie isn't like Rachel's kids. She gets upset easily. Cries a lot. We didn't want to scare her. You didn't want to be inconvenienced, I snapped, standing again. You always saw me as the problem. As the messy one. The complicated one. Rachel threw picture-perfect birthday parties and I brought home a kid from a marriage that fell apart. So you decided Ellie didn't fit in. My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. The judge leaned forward, voice steady. You were not the legal guardians. You were not in any danger. You made zero attempt to contact Ms. Mitchell about your decision. And you misled Child Protective Services. Her gavel came down with a sharp, final thud. I am sentencing both of you to 1 year probation, 300 hours of supervised community service specifically at a licensed child care facility, mandatory counseling for family dynamics, and, most importantly, no contact with Ellie Mitchell without written permission from her legal guardian and approval from a licensed therapist. My mother's cry cracked through the courtroom like broken glass. I didn't look at her. I looked at Ellie. She was staring at the judge, her grip on Clementine tighter than ever. When it was over, I crouched down beside her. You okay, sweetheart? She nodded, then asked quietly, does that mean they won't take me away again? No one, I said, tears in my throat, will ever take you away again. 2 weeks passed. The internet lost interest in the viral story. The news cycle moved on. But our life finally started to settle. Evergreen Elementary welcomed Ellie back with quiet understanding. Her teacher even placed a small lavender plant on her desk to help her feel calm. We started baking together more. Oatmeal cookies. Apple crisps. Messy, uneven, full of laughter. She drew a lot. Planets. Stars. Rockets. And once, a drawing of a red-roofed house with the words, "This is where I'm safe. With Mom." I kept that one taped to the fridge. Then, one rainy afternoon in May, Rachel called. I stared at the screen, heart racing. Then, slowly, I answered. Amy. I'm sorry. I said nothing. She continued, voice softer than I'd ever heard. Jackson asked why Grandma and Grandpa didn't take Ellie to Hawaii. I didn't know what to say. He said if she were his sister, he'd never leave her behind. My hand gripped the counter. I tried to believe it wasn't that bad. That Mom and Dad didn't mean to hurt her. But I saw her face in the newspaper, Amy. I saw her holding that teddy bear, and I realized, I let it happen. I just watched. And I'm sorry. I still didn't speak. I want to make it right, she whispered. I want Ellie to know she matters to me, too. Finally, I found my voice. You can start, I said, by listening. Not defending. Not minimizing. Just listening. Rachel agreed to meet Ellie at the counseling center. The first time was awkward. Ellie barely made eye contact. But by the third meeting, she drew a picture for her aunt, a small boat in the ocean with 3 people holding hands. She said that's you, me, and her, Rachel texted afterward. Floating together. And maybe, just maybe, we could. But I would never stop guarding the shore. Forgiveness isn't some ribbon-wrapped resolution. It doesn't arrive clean, or easy, or because someone says sorry. It grows slowly, if at all, like moss through concrete. And even then, it can still die from a single careless step. I never taught Ellie to forgive quickly. I taught her that forgiveness was a choice, not an obligation. That it was okay to say no. That it was okay to protect herself first. But now I had to live by that rule too. Rachel kept her word. She came to Ellie's therapy sessions, stayed quiet when the counselor spoke, and brought simple gifts, a space-themed notebook, a glow-in-the-dark planet sticker set. She didn't try to fix everything. She didn't try to rewrite history. And maybe that's what mattered most. One afternoon, after a particularly quiet session, Ellie whispered to me on the drive home, I think Aunt Rachel means it. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, saw Clementine in her lap, and the cautious softness in her eyes. I think she does too, sweetheart, I said, though part of me still kept the door half closed. And then came the letter. It arrived on a Friday. A plain envelope, no return address, written in my mother's sharp cursive. I almost threw it away without opening it. But I didn't. Inside were 3 pages. The first began. Amy. I know I have no right to ask you to read this. But if you've come this far, please don't stop now. What I did was wrong. I didn't see it that way at the time, and that's no excuse. I thought I was helping. I thought I knew what was best. But the truth is, I was running. Running from responsibility. From discomfort. From my own failures as a mother. You were never the broken one, Amy. I just didn't know how to handle a daughter who wasn't pretending to be perfect. Rachel made everything look easy. But you were real. And I didn't know how to love that kind of truth without judging it. I stopped reading, breath caught between rage and grief. It continued. When I handed Ellie over, I convinced myself it was temporary. That we'd be back in time. That we weren't abandoning her. But that's exactly what we did. And I will carry that guilt forever. The second page was addressed to Ellie. Dear Ellie. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but if you do, I need you to know I was wrong. You did nothing wrong. You are not too much. You are not difficult. You are not less important than any other grandchild. I made a terrible mistake, and it hurt you in a way I can never take back. I hope, one day, you'll see that none of this was your fault. You are a bright light, and I'm sorry I dimmed it. I folded the pages carefully and tucked them into a drawer. I didn't show them to Ellie. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Some words are meant to be written, not read. By June, life looked different. Ellie had nearly finished third grade. She was back to humming while brushing her teeth, drawing planets on every scrap of paper, and organizing her stuffed animals into missions like they were astronauts. Her therapist, Dr. Miranda Evans, said she was stabilizing, not erasing what happened, but beginning to understand it. Naming her feelings. Expressing them. Owning her own story. You know what I like about Mars? Ellie said one day, as we planted lavender in pots for the porch. What? It's red. It doesn't care if people think it's weird. It just spins and glows anyway. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. You're my little Mars. Then came the call from the hospital. Jennifer, our department head, asked to meet privately. Amy, I've watched you closely this year, she said. How you've handled back-to-back trauma shifts while dealing with everything at home, it's remarkable. And we need someone like you to help train incoming staff. I blinked. Me? You have the experience. The empathy. And the steel. You don't flinch in crisis. This role comes with flexible hours, a 20% pay increase, and priority benefits. I didn't hesitate. I said yes. That evening, I told Ellie the news as she worked on her Lego Mars rover. No more night shifts? Nope. I'll be home most nights now. She nodded, then smiled shyly. That's when I worry the most. At night. Her voice was so small. So honest. I know, baby. That's why I'll be here. We high-fived. And baked oatmeal cookies that came out lumpy but perfect. The following week, Eric's mother, Judith, called out of the blue. She'd heard about everything from a friend who worked at the courthouse. I don't know what to say, she began. But I'd like to visit. If you'll allow me. I hadn't spoken to Judith much since the divorce. Eric had all but disappeared, the occasional child support payment, an occasional email around Ellie's birthday, nothing more. Still, I agreed. She arrived with a telescope. Eric promised her one when she was little. He never followed through. I thought, maybe I could. Ellie ran into her arms the moment she saw her. Judith stayed for dinner, peeled apples in the kitchen, complimented our messy cookies, and helped Ellie set up the telescope in the backyard. When the stars came out, Ellie pointed. That's Saturn. Judith wiped her eyes. She's brilliant. Later, while washing dishes beside me, she said, "I used to think you were just surviving, Amy. But now I see, you were building something strong." Quietly. Fiercely. "I'm sorry I didn't say that sooner." I didn't reply. But I didn't need to. Some apologies don't need words in return. Just quiet acceptance. And then came the unexpected second court hearing. My parents' attorney filed a request to reassess visitation rights, citing completed community service hours and attendance in the family counseling program. Legally, they were permitted to petition. But it was Ellie's choice. Dr. Miranda asked her if she wanted to speak. Ellie nodded. I didn't know what she'd say. I didn't coach her. I didn't influence a thing. But on the day of the hearing, she stood with clementine in hand, white dress neatly pressed, and faced the courtroom. "My name is Ellie Mitchell. I'm 8 years old," she said. "I don't understand all the grown-up words. But I remember what it felt like." The room was dead quiet. I thought I was being returned. Because I did something bad. Because Mommy didn't want me. That's what Grandma said. But it wasn't true. My parents stared down at the table. My mother clutched a tissue. My father didn't move. I know my mom loves me. I know she always comes back. And I'm learning how to forgive, but forgiving doesn't mean I have to be near the people who made me scared. Judge Kingsley nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Ellie." And with that, the verdict was clear. No unsupervised contact. Any future visits to be arranged at the sole discretion of Ellie's guardian, with written approval from her licensed therapist. Later that night, Judith sat with me on the porch. "She's strong," she said. "Just like her mom." The stars twinkled above us. Inside, Ellie read a spacebook by the nightlight. Her curls framed her face like a halo. I thought about everything we'd lost. Everything we'd gained. And realized. Family isn't about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand beside you when everything else falls apart. There's a moment that sneaks up on you in healing, where the grief doesn't vanish, but it stops screaming. It hums instead. And in the quiet, you finally hear something else, your own voice. After the court hearing, Ellie didn't ask to see my parents again. Not once. She didn't bring up the courtroom, the verdict, or the stunned look on my mother's face when she realized Ellie had spoken from her own heart. She just kept moving forward, the way only children can. But it wasn't forgetting, it was growth. She planted it like a seed and watered it with every drawing, every bedtime story, every hug that ended in "I'm so glad you're my mom." And I started moving forward too. The hospital's new training initiative launched in July. I was teaching newer nurses how to stay calm during mass trauma, how to spot signs of emotional exhaustion in patients, how to talk to families who have just lost someone, all while keeping a human face. I wasn't just a nurse anymore. I was a leader. And I didn't need anyone else to validate that. One afternoon, as I left work early for the first time in years, Ellie met me at the front door holding a glitter-covered sign. "Welcome home early, Mom. Mission Mars is ready for launch." She had set up a pillow fort shaped like a space station in the living room. Snacks lined the perimeter. A paper rocket dangled from the ceiling fan. And on the coffee table sat her teddy bear Clementine, now wearing a makeshift helmet made from a salad bowl and foil. I laughed so hard I cried. That night, under our cosmic canopy, she said something I'll never forget. "I think I want to be the kind of grown-up who doesn't forget what it feels like to be small." I stared at her, stunned. Because when Grandma forgot, it made me feel invisible. But you never forget. I reached over and squeezed her hand. And I never will. But life has a way of testing you even after you've learned your lessons. One evening in early August, I received an email. The subject line read, "Request for mediation, David and Lorraine Mitchell." My parents had requested a supervised mediation session. Not a court proceeding, something softer. Facilitated by a professional to seek understanding and closure. I stared at the screen, emotionless. They wanted closure? They had watched my daughter be placed into foster care like she was someone else's responsibility. They'd skipped the guilt and gone straight to cocktails. And now they wanted closure? Still. I read the request again. It wasn't mandatory. I had every right to decline. And part of me wanted to. But then I thought of Ellie, how she was learning what forgiveness meant. How she wasn't being forced into it, but exploring it. And if I wanted to raise her to be brave enough to set boundaries, I had to model what that looked like. So I agreed. The mediation was scheduled at a neutral facility near the courthouse. I arrived early, wearing a navy blue blouse and black slacks. Not formal, not casual. Just enough armor to face the people who once called themselves my foundation. The room was simple. A round table, 4 chairs, a pitcher of water. The mediator was a woman in her 50s, with gray curls and soft eyes. My parents arrived 5 minutes late. My mother wore beige, the color of guilt, maybe. My father had aged 10 years and 3 months. His once sharp posture now slightly hunched. No one hugged. No one smiled. The mediator opened. This isn't about deciding who was right. This is about expression, listening, and responsibility. Amy, would you like to begin? I took a breath. You treated my daughter like a burden, I said. You acted like babysitting was a favor rather than a privilege. You didn't call me. You didn't warn me. You just made her disappear. My father's lips parted, but the mediator lifted her hand. Please let her finish. She thought she was being returned like a broken toy. Do you understand what that does to a child? She asked if I gave her away because she spilled juice. My voice broke. You hurt her more than you hurt me. And you hurt me more than I knew a person could. You took the one safe place I'd built for her, Thus, and lit a match. Silence. Then my mother spoke. I was wrong, she said softly. I didn't understand how deep the damage would go. I thought I was helping, but I was helping myself. Escaping. She looked down. I read your daughter's testimony. I replayed it in my head 100 times. I don't expect you to let me near her again. I just want you to know. I'll live with the shame. And then, to my shock, my father cleared his throat. I wasn't always a good father to you, Amy. I taught you how to be strong, but I never showed you softness. I confused control with love. And I carried that into being a grandfather. He looked up. You were always enough. You just made me uncomfortable. You were too honest. Too raw. But that's not your fault. That was my cowardice. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt sorrow. They were broken people. Not monsters. And broken people can still do monstrous things. I don't know if there's a future, I said. That's not up to me. That's up to Ellie. And her therapist. And time. The mediator nodded. That's fair. That's honest. As I left the room, my mother called out, voice shaking. Tell her, her teddy bear is still on the guest bed. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. That evening, Ellie helped me chop vegetables for dinner. Mom, she said. If someone's really sorry, does that mean we have to be friends again? No, I replied gently. Being sorry is a start. But you don't owe anyone your trust. That's something they have to earn. She nodded slowly. Even if they're family? Especially then. In the months that followed, we slowly began rewriting what family meant. There were sleepovers with Mrs. Kimball, who had officially been added to our emergency contact list. Weekend trips to the coast with Judith, who had quietly offered to help pay for Ellie's summer camp. And Rachel? she kept showing up. Quietly. Consistently. On the last day of school, Ellie handed me a drawing. It showed a spaceship floating through space, surrounded by stars. Inside the spaceship were 4 stick figures. She pointed to each. This one's you. That's me. Aunt Rachel. And Grandma Judy. And the stars? Those are the people we trust. The ones who help us keep going. I pressed my hand to my mouth, fighting tears. The galaxy was still scarred. But Ellie had found her crew. By September, the leaves outside our apartment window had begun to curl at the edges, burnt orange, yellow, a soft rust red that made Ellie call them sunset trees. Our life had finally found a rhythm that didn't feel like survival. It felt like living. Most nights, we cooked together. She made it her mission to crack every egg perfectly. No shells allowed. When the weather cooled, we curled on the couch beneath her galaxy blanket, reading books or stargazing through the telescope Judith gave her. The world didn't feel dangerous anymore. But memory doesn't always fade with the seasons. One afternoon, I was going through paperwork when I found an old folder buried in my cabinet, Ellie's baby photos, my wedding license, and a letter Eric had once written, back before the betrayal, back when he still talked like forever meant something. I froze, unsure why I hadn't thrown it out. Ellie walked in, saw it in my hands, and asked, "Is that from Daddy?" I hesitated. "Yeah. A long time ago." She studied me carefully. Then said, "Do you think he'll ever come back?" The question didn't sting like it used to. "I think," I said, kneeling beside her, "some people don't know how to show up the right way. And when someone disappears long enough, we stop looking for them. We look for the people who stay." She nodded thoughtfully. "So, we don't hate them. But we don't wait either?" Exactly. A few weeks later, Ellie's therapist, Dr. Miranda Evans, called me with news. A final review session was being scheduled to assess Ellie's emotional progress 6 months after her abandonment, part of CPS's follow-up process after high-profile custody cases. "I'd like to include Ellie in the final portion," she said. "Only if she agrees." When I asked Ellie, she paused before saying, "Can I tell them what I learned?" "Of course." She showed up to that session with a crayon drawing in hand, a large planet ringed by little stars. Each star had a name: Mom, Judith, Rachel, Martha, Mr. Kimball, Dr. Evans, even Clementine. "This is my universe," she explained. "These are the ones who stayed." Dr. Evans blinked away tears. "And what about forgiveness, Ellie? How do you feel about that now?" Ellie didn't even pause. "I think forgiveness is like giving someone a second backpack. So they can carry what they did. But I don't have to carry it for them." Even the CPS supervisor sat back, eyes wide. Later that evening, while brushing her teeth, Ellie said between spits of foam, "I don't think Grandma and Grandpa will ever get a second backpack from me. But I'm okay now." She was okay now. And that was everything. Then, in October, I got an email. From Eric. I hadn't heard from him in almost a year, no cards, no calls. Child support had been inconsistent. But now, suddenly, a long message. He claimed he had matured. That he wanted to visit. That he was trying to make amends. He asked to see Ellie. I stared at the screen for 5 minutes, then 10, then closed my laptop without replying. I didn't answer him that day. Or the next. Instead, I met with Dr. Miranda, discussed the possible impact, and waited for Ellie's next session. Then I sat across from my daughter at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea and said, "Your dad wants to talk to you." She blinked slowly. "Why now?" "I don't know." "Do I have to?" "No. You never have to." She nodded. "Then I don't want to." "Not yet." That was enough for me. I sent Eric a reply. "Ellie is not ready. She may reach out one day, but not because you asked, because she wants to. Until then, respect her silence. He never responded. Halloween came and went. Ellie dressed as a moon explorer. Judith took photos. Rachel helped sew her cape. There was no awkwardness anymore. Just people showing up, week after week. One Saturday, we were at the park when Ellie looked up and said, "Mom?" "Yeah?" "If you had a choice, would you still pick me?" I dropped to my knees. "I didn't just pick you. I'd pick you in every lifetime, every universe, every version of this world. You're my girl." She smiled and hugged me like it was the first time all over again. And then, almost anticlimactically, the final court notice came. The Mitchell vs. State case was officially closed. No further contact permitted unless initiated by Ellie, with therapist supervision. Probation completed. Community service hours filed. Case sealed. My parents would face no further penalties, but neither would they get another chance to hurt my daughter. That was the end. No dramatic final confrontation. No tearful reunion. Just a sealed file, a protective order, and the final gavel drop that officially ended their control over our lives. The next day, Ellie asked to burn a copy of the court papers. I raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" She nodded. "I don't want to keep them. I want to let them go." So we built a little backyard fire pit with Judith and Rachel. Ellie tossed the pages in one by one. The flames curled up, devoured the paper, and carried the ash into the air. She clapped once and said, "Goodbye, fear." Rachel wiped her eyes. Judith whispered, "That girl's stronger than all of us combined." And I just sat back, watching my daughter laugh and roast marshmallows like her world had never been anything but whole. Later that night, as I tucked her in, she said, "Mom? Amachim? I think you're my home." That's when I cried. Not because I was sad. But because for the first time in forever, we both believed it. They say wounds heal with time. But I don't believe that anymore. Time doesn't heal anything. People do. And some wounds don't heal, they become part of you. They shape your bones, your breath, your beliefs. But they don't have to define you. The morning after we burned the court papers, Ellie ran outside to collect the ashes that hadn't flown away. She scooped a few into a jar and placed it on her shelf between her Constellation nightlight and Clementine. "What's that for?" I asked, drying my hands on a dish towel. "It's to remember," she said. "So I don't forget I was strong once. In case I need to be again." I nearly dropped the towel. That's what this entire year had been, one long, aching lesson in strength. In learning that sometimes the people who hurt you most don't come with warning signs. Sometimes they come wrapped in warm hugs and Sunday dinners and we're just doing what's best. But when the mask slips, what matters is who you become afterward. Fall settled in. Ellie and I picked apples at a local orchard, made our own cider, and decorated the porch with tiny pumpkins she painted to look like planets. Judith came every Sunday. Rachel joined us for library trips. Martha Kimball sent a Christmas card with a drawing Ellie had made of their backyard maple tree, laminated and framed. For the first time in years, I didn't dread the holidays. I didn't feel second best. I didn't feel like the daughter who disappointed everyone by being exhausted and imperfect. I just felt like myself. And like that was enough. On the last day of the school term, Ellie came home with a gold-starred essay titled, "My Safe Place." She handed it to me without a word, eyes shining. I sat on the couch and read every word like it was scripture. My safe place isn't a building. It's not my bedroom, or a library, or even my school. It's a person. My mom is my safe place. When people left, she stayed. When I thought I was too much, she said I was just enough. She makes me cinnamon toast on rainy days and tells me stories that always end with a hug. She listens even when I don't say things out loud. She fights for me, even when she's tired. I used to think home was a house. Now I know it's wherever she is. I finished reading and looked up at her. Did your teacher cry when she read this? Ellie giggled. A little. I pulled her into my arms. I hope you know you're my safe place too. She leaned against me, the way she always did when she didn't want the moment to end. You're my forever. By January, I'd saved enough money to put a down payment on a small home, just outside town, with a big yard and a creaky porch Ellie called perfect for stargazing. Judith helped me move in. Rachel painted the walls. We made a sign for the door that read, "Welcome to Planet Ellie, population 2 and sometimes 3 with Grandma Judy." We never mentioned my parents again. Not because we were erasing them, but because they no longer defined the shape of our story. They were just a chapter, not the whole book. A few weeks later, I stood in front of my ER colleagues at the hospital's annual recognition banquet. I didn't expect anything. I didn't even know why I was invited. But when Jennifer took the stage and said, "This year's award for excellence in crisis leadership goes to someone who carried more than her share and never dropped the load," I froze. She called my name. The room stood and clapped. And I stood, knees trembling, in a room full of people who didn't know how badly I'd once believed I wasn't enough. I gave no big speech. Just held the award and said, "Thank you for reminding me that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just showing up, day after day, for the people who need you most." And then I went home to my daughter. That night, under the stars, we sat on the porch with mugs of cocoa. Ellie looked up at the sky through her telescope and said, "Mom, do you think stars get scared when they burn?" I looked at her and smiled. Probably. But maybe that's how they shine. She nodded. I think we're like stars too. I reached over, took her hand. And in that quiet Oregon night, with only the sound of crickets and the echo of healing between us, I realized something. Forgiveness hadn't saved us. Love had. Not the kind that asks you to forget what happened, but the kind that walks with you through the ashes, holds your hand when the courtroom is silent, and reminds you every single day that you are not too complicated, too tired, or too much. You are enough. And no one gets to take that from you. Not even family. This is Amy's story, but it could be any of ours. Sometimes, the people closest to us fail us in ways that leave scars no apology can fix. But when we choose to protect what matters, with courage, not bitterness, we create something stronger than revenge. We create legacy. What would you have done in Amy's place? Could you forgive? Would you fight for justice? Let us know in the comments. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful true-to-life tales of betrayal, strength, and the quiet victories that change everything.